young Americans should care more about the growing national debt than anyone else because they're going to have to pay it off with interest and increasingly to foreign countries. So that will directly lower the standard of living that we will have in this country, that future generations will enjoy. And that most economists think that when you get north of about 90% of debt to GDP ratio, you really start eating your seed corn. You start consuming the money that would otherwise be available for education and investment, research and development, and new jobs and new industries and all that kind of thing. And we're well on the way to hitting that level, unfortunately. So young Americans have the biggest stake of all and should care about this more than anybody else.
Okay, let's just touch a little bit on interest. So in 2020, interest is projected to be $916 billion. And so what are the ramifications of such a large chunk of what we're spending going to interest?
Well, that's 900 and some billion dollars that could be going to education, to healthcare, to investment in new products and services and jobs. And increasingly that money is not being paid to other Americans. It's being paid to China, to Japan, to other countries. So that's a direct flow of wealth from the United States to other countries. And we are consuming today and asking future generations to pay tomorrow. So it's deeply unfair in my point of view. And those projections that you mentioned include the assumption that interest rates won't spike up. If you see a significant rise in interest rates, which some people believe could happen, the payments will be even higher.
How does this large debt affect us on the international market? I mean, how are we viewed abroad now? What's going to happen to us in the future?
Well, when you talk to Chinese leaders today privately, they will say very directly they think the United States is going to be a second-rate power in the years to come, that we will have a strong military because of our nuclear forces, but that in every other sense we will not be one of the preeminent nations. And that's because they take a very long historical view. They know that if you look at history, it is unheard of to be strong militarily, diplomatically, economically, and yet be a huge debtor nation. It's just these two things, fiscal strength and other types of strength, go hand in hand. And you can see the Chinese now using the huge surpluses that they're running up to curry favor in Africa and South America, to purchase and tie up critical natural resources. So you can't decouple a nation's standing in the world from its fiscal and economic strength. And unfortunately, we're on the path toward that result.
Tomorrow will be a tax day in the U.S. Everyone will have to have their taxes in. So what should we, a lot of people project that taxes could go upward of maybe 50% if we don't do anything. I mean, what do you see happening with taxes? And do you think we should look at the tax code?
Well, when you're dealing with a deficit like this, there are only a few things you can do. You can keep borrowing, but that becomes unsustainable. And so there's a limit. Eventually the market reacts. And you can see what's happening in Greece right now. And eventually it leads to either a default, a dramatic decline in the currency, a lower standard of living. It's a very ugly thing, so that's not an acceptable path. The other two things you can do are to reduce spending through entitlement reform, other spending restraint. I personally believe that's where we should start. And the third way, of course, is once you've cut all the spending that you can, if you've still got an unacceptable, unsustainable problem, you've got to look at revenues.
Should we look at revamping the tax code?
Right. Yeah, we probably should. Our tax code, in some ways, discourages investment, discourages business formation, encourages consumption. For the long-term economic growth of the country, probably ought to be the other way around.
You mentioned entitlement cuts. What type of cuts should we be looking to do? Should we be thinking about raising the age of Social Security? Should we, what should we do for Medicare? I mean, we just expanded it by a large number of people. So what are we going to do to control the costs?
Well, those are two different but very good questions. The last time Social Security was addressed, which was back in the early 80s, a Republican President, Ronald Reagan, and a Democratic Congress realized that Social Security was about to go bankrupt and they needed to do something. One of the things they did in recognition of the fact that people were living longer is that they very gradually phased in an increase in the retirement age. So, for example, I won't be eligible for Social Security until I think I'm like 67 and a half years old. Back at that time, you were automatically eligible for full benefits at 65. So it gradually began to increase. That's something that will probably be looked at again. There are other things. Some of the ways in which it's called the deflator, annual increases in Social Security expenditures are calculated, many economists and statisticians feel overestimates the rate of inflation. So at least it ought to be statistically accurate. Other things, the increases are based on productivity growth rather than the rate of inflation. That's one thing that might be looked at. You need to probably look at, for example, Bill Gates or Donald Trump have paid into Social Security. Currently, they will get back not only the amount they paid in, they'll get back the amount they paid in plus inflation. They'll get the amount they paid in back plus inflation plus productivity growth on top of that. So perhaps for millionaires and people like that, allowing them to get paid back what they paid in makes sense, but maybe not the extra that other people get who aren't nearly so well off. So you've got to look at all those things. And it's regrettable that back in the day when we had a surplus, we didn't use that to help people create some private accounts in addition to Social Security that would have helped solve some of this funding gap, but didn't happen. It's too bad, and obviously we don't have a surplus today. With regard to Medicare, that's a very complex situation, and some of the things that the expansion of health care coverage, according to the Congressional Budget Office, at least didn't make the situation worse if you believe Congress will have the guts to actually stick with some of the harder things that will help to make that so. People have a right to be a little skeptical about Congress.
Yeah.
But some things, the tax code actually encourages today more spending on health care. There are some gradual changes in the bill that will begin to level the playing field so that we should spend on health care, but perhaps at a time where we're trying to control health care costs, not actually have an incentive to do that kind of thing. It's been referred to as Medicare on steroids, and what that would involve is look at best practices that would help to provide quality health care, but in the most efficient way for senior citizens, and then hope that that will expand from Medicare throughout the health care system. That has some real promise, but again, there will be some people who will object to that because even if you're just encouraging best practices, not mandating it, some people think that treads upon unlimited freedom of choice in regard to health care. But right now we can't afford to keep paying what we're paying, so you got to look for some ways to guarantee good quality health care, but in a way we can afford going forward.
Right. Young Americans, probably we see a lot of spending going on right now to finance what we're doing, a lot of borrowing into the future. What type of investments should we be making right now to ensure that there are jobs in the future, that we have a tax base to pay off all this money we've already borrowed?
Well, there is a fair amount of spending going on, and I'm one of the few people, particularly in my party, who voted against the budgets of Republican presidents and the current president, even though he's a friend of mine and someone I support, because I felt that increases in spending double, triple, quadruple the rate of inflation with the kind of deficit we currently have just was something we couldn't do right now. We needed to tighten our belt, get the deficit under control, and then prioritize the spending we're putting into place. But you ask where, when we do spend money, we should prioritize it. And clearly in things, research and development, improved education, new generation energy projects to free us of our dependency on imports of important petroleum, renewable energy projects, whether it's wind or solar or environmentally effectively using the coal that we have, the gas reserves we have. All those kind of things would be, in some ways, a twofer. They help grow the economy, which itself helps bring the deficit down because you've got additional revenue streams, and they free us of our dependency on foreign debt and foreign oil, which again is a huge wealth outflow from our country and is harmful to all Americans, but particularly young Americans.